Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining panel. My name is Mario Carrasco, co-founder of ThinkNow. Excited to moderate this panel. Hopefully, this is the most you'll hear me talk during the panel. So let's kick it off. Andrew, if you want to introduce yourself to everyone, please.
Sure. I'm Andrew Abony. I'm the CEO of Adbloom. We're a user acquisition and user recruitment firm based in Toronto, Canada, and serve the market research industry, financial services, mobile app, rewards, gig economy, and we traffic in high quality respondents and panelists, and really, helping to recruit human beings that want to participate and engage in market research thoughtfully. So thanks for having me.
Tim Cornelius. I'm the Director of Audience Operations at QuestionPro. I'm in charge of getting respondents, data quality, all things fun like that. I'm also the CEO of P3 Technology, a disability advocacy, respondent experience organization.
I'm Kelsey Curtis, and everybody looks at me and they say, "What are you doing here?" I'm with VMLY&R, creative agency out of Kansas City, Mo, and I sit in the research studio there and I lead up our quantitative practice. So, like many, my journey into advertising was an interesting one. Started out in age and gender studies, and then kind of evolved into this analytics person through customer and employee experience, and then landed back home with primary quant research. So that's where I am now.
Great, yeah, excited. We have really good representation of different parts of the sample industry. And before we dive into the specifics about the next generation, I want to talk a little bit about how we're defining the next generation. If you remember, 5-10 years ago, it was all about millennials, but it feels like kind of old news now, right? So how are each of your organizations defining the next generation of panelists? Kelsey, let's kick it off with you there.
Yeah, so when we talked about this a little bit ahead of time, I think, the two words that came to mind for me are fluid and evolving. So when I think about panelists, I think about, well, who are my clients trying to reach, and how are they most genuinely going to reach them? And I think that the answer is none of us really know, because this generation, when we think about Gen Z and Gen Alpha, we're thinking about people who are kind of coming into their own, but they're also deeply rooted in their own identities, and maybe more so than any other generation before them. So when I think about the next generation of panelists, I'm really thinking about the next generation of consumer and customer in kind of creative ways.
Are you, Tim?
Sure. I think at QuestionPro, we define the next generation of respondents as the people that don't currently want to take our surveys, but we're evolving. What I would say is their next generation is very fluid, as you said, and I think that we're going to have to evolve the way that we think and live life the way that they live, and understand what's important to them, what grabs their attention, and what aids in what they care about, whether that's a environmental concern, or money, or actually pushing products and making them better for the better of society.
Yeah.
Mario, thank you for asking Kelsey to go first, because it was really informative to hear everybody else's answers before I had to. I think for us on the recruitment and the marketing side, and being right in front of that consumer, we think less about, categorizing, or, we don't talk about Gen Z that much in our office. We talk about, hey, how are we going to integrate this project in a Telegram group and get people excited enough about it that they want to actually go and engage in that survey or that project? And how do we take this sort of raw project that's really interesting and has all the right pieces that a consumer is going to really want to engage with, but then formulate it into a bite-sized piece that a Gen Z, or a teen, or a young person would maybe want to engage with. And to the point of to Timothy's point, I mean, the 18 to 24-year-old is still a very hard audience to go after. They're much less interested in participating, and so there's a question of how do we get them interested, and then also how do you really engage with them and really get them to engage once they're in? So these are, I think we're constantly just getting and trying to be at the forefront of where consumers are engaging with content, and then, trying to sort of drag our clients' projects into the modern world so that we can help support.
For sure, and I think Kelsey alluded to something we discussed prior to this panel in terms of how central this concept of identity is to the next generation. And I think one thing to point out that we're all kind of grappling with as an industry is Gen Z is the most diverse generation in the America's history, right? And I think that affects so many things. We're going to have a presentation later on today in terms of how we ask things like ethnicity, gender, race. How has that kind of affected the way that you approach panelists from the lens of identity?
I can kick it off.
Yeah.
I think there's there's a lot to it, and I think one of the things that we've spent a lot of time and brain space doing is thinking about how we're going to ask about people's identity in both an inclusive way, but also in a practical way. And I think there's just a lot to unpack, and I will keep saying evolving and fluid because that's exactly how we're treating it in a lot of ways. And there's, a living, breathing document around how we want to ask about how people identify themselves, and it could be even minor tweaks around, instead of having an other category, having a prefer to self-describe category, and just taking what people see themselves as and allowing them to express that in a really meaningful way.
And I feel like you have a interesting pipeline or direct to brands. I mean, how are brands accepting kind of some of that feedback or that fluid take that your company is approaching it with?
I smile because it's tough, right? I think it varies a lot by brand, and there's this lingering history with many brands that it's difficult to disrupt because they need to track things over time. They need to think about things in a longitudinal fashion, and when you start shaking up the bedrock of how people have thought about people, it can be really challenging to kind of think about it in an evolving way as much as it is a hard switch into a different way of thinking. And sometimes we're successful in guiding our clients to reevaluate the way they're asking, and sometimes it's a side-by-side test where it's like, look, you can see how these things are going to stack up. But other times there's just a lot more conversations to be had before they can legitimately make a change that makes sense for their business.
Sure. Andrew, I feel like you wanted to jump in there.
It certainly begets the question of, do we have to ask all these questions all the time? We're obviously ethnically different, but let's just say we both like to ride motorcycles, and we're both living in relatively similar zip codes, and we both like to do X, Y, Z. Does it really matter that you're Hispanic and I'm white? And I think, hey, a lot of people in market research will say yes. From a conversion standpoint and marketing the consumer, for us, sometimes, if we're just going after a male sports fan, we don't care. To us, it doesn't really matter. Why should it matter where that person's from, or what they look like? If they love sports and they love the NFL, maybe there's an opportunity to rethink that whole thing, because I think, especially in a world today where, we're all, we've all been in a meeting where we're thinking about that, the drop down of gender and how that looks, and, it might be, I wonder if on the more research side, if we might start seeing some changes there from, maybe it'll come from the brand, or maybe it'll come, because it's got to come from kind of up top. But I think about those types of things, and for us, it's really because we're, our performance is driven by the conversion of getting that human being to get into the project, and if they get disqualified or they get a question that they don't want to answer, or they're not particularly interested in typing in their birth date and their age again, we always wonder hey, is that really that necessary to do? If we just want to get somebody in this project and they meet most of the qualifications, why stop it? But it's a really interesting question, and from our side, those are the things that we're seeing. Sometimes if we have to build a landing page and there's these new things to take into consideration, having a really good direction probably a good first step. But I really wonder, like, if all these questions are always that necessary.
Yeah, shortening questions, it always helps out, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Andrew here. I feel like that you shouldn't be asked the same question about where you're from, your gender, your age, all of the time. But there are certain questions that we aren't asking, and we all need to agree that these questions need to be applicable. There's a serious issue with the accessibility across tools in our market, across brands. The landscape as it is right now, I feel like Andrew was saying something to me the other day about how we have this beautiful product and we funnel the respondent into a survey, and then what does the survey look like? Not that great.
It's not a beautiful product.
Exactly. You can be the one
honest here. But it is what it is, and so the more that we can help handhold that user in and engage with them in a tone that's going to be respectful and educational and get them to, get them where they need to be is great. So yeah.
Yeah, and
I was just going to add real quickly that I think another big piece of this, and your point reminded me, is that I think it's really important that when we are going to ask the questions, even when there are now options, as we learned yesterday, to not ask every single time, that people are seeing themselves in the options, right? So we know that being deeply rooted in that identity, understanding that even if they don't see their exact option when they do get asked the questions, that they see a more diverse set of options. And I think that's something as an industry we're responsible for driving.
Sure. And Tim, I want to talk a little bit about, we had a conversation before, we tend to think about the next generation being always connected on social media, access to internet. But we're talking about there's a large swath of the population, including the next generation, that doesn't have necessarily access to internet, accessibility issues. Can you talk a little bit about how you all are solving for that?
Sure, absolutely. We've found that when immigrants come to the United States, one of the hardest things to do is get a banking account. If you don't have a banking account, you can't deposit your check. If you can't deposit your check, you can't pay for things. If you can't send money home, why are you here in the United States instead of being with your family? So one of the ways to make money, of course, is surveys and giving your point of view as an unacculturated American. We've found that partnering with money transferring apps that are very secure and really hard to partner with, we're able to get to those individuals that might not have their own device, might have a preloaded device with very, very limited internet access, and we're able to ask them questions that pertain to them. And it's not, if you are one of these 10 different countries of origin, you can proceed into the survey. And in clicking other, and then having to write one of the other 9 different Latin American alone countries that account for 8.6% of the population as of last year is really offensive. Putting all those numbers together it really just biases your sample. So I would say, QuestionPro is not going to be the one to go out there with a clipboard to the person, but P3 is going out there with a clipboard to the person and asking them, why don't you have a phone? And why don't you have internet? And solving those problems from the ground up.
Yeah, and I think on the other side of the spectrum, right, Andrew, you alluded to this, we have kind of this perception of Gen Z, Gen Alpha as an instant generation, being used to beautiful user interfaces, 10, 15, 6-second content, and our surveys aren't necessarily like that all the time. How are we broaching that, kind of trying to get a panelist from?
That's a really good question. Yeah. So I think, it'd be pretty simple to just say, well, the platform's sucking, and they just don't look good. And I think a lot of, I think we do that quite often, and I think we all probably complain about it in our 9 to 5s. And so, I think we have some clients today who are now making meaningful change in how they think about their engagement and the user experience. And we're human beings, so the only time that a company or a human is going to make a real significant change is when they really have to. And so I think the writing's on the wall now. You start seeing, very respectable companies saying, hey, the 25-minute survey doesn't work anymore, so we've got 5-minute surveys, and here's how we're slotting it, and that makes a lot of sense. And you're like, yes, finally, that makes a lot of sense, right? Because, if you're hoping that somebody's going to convert on a 30-minute survey from their mobile phone, I can't pay attention to anything for more than 4 minutes, and I'm like a highly trained professional, I think.
This panel's an hour, though.
Yeah, I don't know where, I keep seeing the clock, and I'm like, I don't know what we're gonna do with 33 minutes. So, when we started off in market research, we started looking at projects, and we're like, okay, what is this? And so it was like, okay, we need to build a beautiful front end. Like, okay, we build a beautiful landing page, and that helps. But then also taking into consideration what media consumption looks like today, right? So, all of you folks you're all working in market research, your panels and communities, these are ads. That's how we get humans into the projects. They're ads, whether it's a survey on an offer wall, or it's a blog post, or it's something on Instagram, or it's a TikToker. And the media has really changed significantly, right? We've seen a drastic change in just 10 years. We're talking about 10 years ago, we were like, Facebook was hot. Now we've got, and people would maybe read a 300 to 500 word blog post and then get to your panel or get to your project. That's how it worked. So somebody was actually reading something, then clicking yes, and maybe going through a couple other steps. Now it's we're in Telegram groups where these are snap decisions that are being made. We've seen traffic go from like Instagram just posts to the story to now it's the reel to now it's like. And really the next thing is we see instant messaging coming back in a really big way because people are huddling together in micro communities around intents and interests, whether it's on Telegram or WhatsApp or in Instagram groups or on Facebook. So the amount of attention that's being given to whatever is seen, it's just gone down because we have so many things happening on our phones. Desktop doesn't exist anymore. Forget about a computer. And so. I think what will inevitably happen, and we're seeing that change, is that the research firms are going to want to level set the playing field so that the experience that they're offering the consumers matches the experience that we're all getting from the digital services that we rely upon. If you go on Instagram or YouTube or Snapchat or any app, these are beautiful experiences, and I think we can all agree that you wouldn't say the same thing about most market research projects, and then I know there's a reason why, but I think that those things have to balance out. But that's where the consumer's at, and they have expectations of this is how things look, and the attention spans are lower, and everybody's on mobile. So you really have to take that into consideration. So we build landing pages. They are mobile first. They are blazing fast because even to Timothy's point, somebody might be on 3G. There's a lot of people that are on 3 and 4G. Right. So you can't have a heavy load website if you want to capture that person's attention and try and steal 5 minutes away from them. So those are all really important considerations. It's obviously where we're at today. It's not like this is where the industry is going. This is where consumers are today. These are the things that we deal with, and I think we do really well. But the more that those people can have a very similar high quality experience in a research project, the more likely they are to engage, the more likely they are to give good quality answers. We talk about quality all the time, and everyone here is concerned about quality. If we ask the questions the right way and we present them in a maybe a better manner, a more efficient manner, I think we end up getting just an overall better experience for the user and then better data for your clients, which is the end goal. So.
Really interesting thought, right? And I'm sitting here thinking, yeah, that sounds amazing. And I'm equally concerned about quality, and I want to design short, engaging surveys. And then I go to my client and say, okay, you've got budget, you've got 2 weeks. What can we do? And they're like, we want a 45-minute survey that captures everything we need to know for the year. Like, great, we can do that, maybe. And I think it's really interesting as we think about the tools that we can help supply from a research perspective that will help clients step through that journey with us to say, you can ask a 45-minute survey, but by the time you get to minute 15, you've lost them. Or, when we think about who we partner with, that's a huge question is, who are we talking to and which partner can we talk to that's gonna be the best able to reach that population and get a real authentic, engaging sort of read on who they are and what they think. And it's a paradox for us, right? I don't know that it lives completely within survey duration or length as much as it lives in engagement, to your point. Like, if you can engage someone in a meaningful way, you might get them for more than 4 minutes. But you have to take that step with them and meet them where they have expectations, but not sacrifice the rigor and not sacrifice the fidelity of the data. And that's a tough balance, especially when you're butted up against, okay, my client has this much money, this much time, and this is the only shot we're gonna get at this. So I love what you're saying. I love the idea of short surveys and not asking all of the questions at every engagement, but sometimes it feels like that might be the only option.
Can I ask a question? Do you guys ever force a client to take the 45-minute survey before they release it?
I try to have all my clients test their stuff, but it's different, right? When you know the content, you can fly through it. You're like, I'm just gonna check to make sure that there aren't grammatical errors or any major red flags. They're not experiencing it like a respondent would. And it's tough because we might get their attention for 30 minutes a day or an hour a week to discuss this project. And it's one of 100 that they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And we want to be respectful of that. At the same time, we're trying to push them to think about what's best practice. How are we going to truly rely upon this information if we can't actually trust it? But it is a really tough place to be, and again, agree with everything that I heard yesterday and today, and I have the same concerns, but my audience is slightly different. And I'm the one coming to you guys saying, how can we make this work, right? Like, I have this request and I have to reconcile these things. So it is a paradox for us, and as much as we try to guide and coach and suggest, sometimes we lose.
And this is a struggle that we've had as an industry. Like, it feels like we've been talking forever, shortening surveys, right? Do you find that the conversations are getting easier, or, I mean, are clients are more aware of the disconnect of the internet experience versus survey experience that younger panelists are having?
I think they're getting easier in this space that we can often couch the conversation, and we're talking to a younger group of people, right? And many of them have kids that are in line with the age groups that we're trying to reach. And it's like, well, how long does your kid hang out on their phone? And how long do they actually engage with a single piece of content? And they're like, well, they watch a YouTube video every once in a while that's 20 minutes. So think about that from that perspective. But I think, like I said earlier, it varies from client to client. Their experiences, their clientele, their consumer are different. So when we have a younger group of folks that we're trying to reach, it resonates a bit more. But they're often bound as well to, yes, I understand what you're trying to get us to do, but this is the option we have. So it's still a tough conversation, but maybe slightly easier.
And Tim, would love to hear your perspective from.
Absolutely. I always think that communities are a great option here, where you're able to recruit and then ask them, but then you kind of get skewed to, these are the people that like me, or these are the people that do not like me. And I think about, we need to meet the next generation where they live by doing it at bite-sized pieces at a time. When you say, I'm trying to get them to do a 45-minute survey, I think, well, there's a little education with the client that you have to have, but also I think of, gosh, that's a lot of at-bats. I can give you a lot of 5-second clips that can drive you to my surveys. And I already know 26 data points on you, and I can ask you one question. I can append everything that you've previously stated before, maybe re-ask some of the things that are fluid. But other than that, I think shorter surveys that meet the consumers where they are, whether that's a geolocation thing or a post-purchase validation thing. I just think we have a serious opportunity as an industry to get lots and lots and lots and lots more engagement with the next generation 5 seconds at a time.
I even think like, you know, the survey length is important. I mean, it's important, but you know, on the flip side, you know, if it's a serious thing or, you know, you have a lot of questions to ask, I think you can still, I think, you know, we go back to the user experience of what that survey actually looks like for the person, right? So when we talk about it like a gorgeous experience in Instagram, like, okay, we know what that is, and you go to the landing page, it looks good, good, good. You get through the screener and it starts sucking. And, you know, if you were asking yes or no questions, you know, for today's audience, we're pretty used to swiping left and swiping right.
Right.
You know, but we don't see that as a form variable in most market research software packages. But it's so natural, and considering that all of your consumers are on mobile phones, doing this and doing that is not only just like normal for people in our, I mean, my age range and certainly younger and older in all age ranges, but like, you know, there's a lot of really like fun, easy UX features that we're not taking advantage of. You know, it's like, remember the dot matrix tests we used to take at school? Like you'd fill in and then they would put it through a scanner. Like that's what taking a survey today, and in most of the surveys, you know, most of the survey web pages look, and it's not a fault. They were just built like 20 years ago. And I think there's just this massive opportunity for somebody to build a better type of solution that, you know, that asks, we're all gonna have to ask the same questions. I think we're all resolved that like the clients aren't necessarily gonna take it from 45 to 25 like we'd want them to. But maybe if we made it a lot easier for people to sit in a 45-minute survey with whether it's gesture-based or other, you know, I think that that's where things can get really interesting for this industry, is just making it a much more gamified, more interesting, more modern experience. And I think we'd have happier respondents because of that, because they're not like, oh man, this sucks. Like I can't believe I've got to like point in this checkbox. I can't get the checkbox and I'm gone. Yeah. I'm done. Sorry, not interested in the $3 survey anymore. So I think that's something that we, every time we look at a project, we're like, oh my gosh. And you make a really good point on community, you know, like and I can't speak to like the more hardcore market research stuff because we just get people in and signed up and they like it. But, you know, we find that you know, on the media side, on like the ad side, it's a lot more interesting to talk about a time-limited interest or sort of demo-based sort of private website, you know, private community where, hey, you're a really special person, we think you qualify. If you take 3 minutes, you'll find out, and then you get X rewards. Hey, that's super cool. You know, versus sort of, you know, some of the other projects which are maybe a little bit less interesting, but nevertheless not less important. But you know, coming up with different angles and being able to market around different angles, even if it's for an individual survey, because, you know, when you think about the different demographics we have to reach, you know, one message means a lot to one type of person, and that message might not mean anything to the other. No. And so you've got to sort of think about, you know, on a demographic, ethnic, gender, et cetera basis, or just on the cohorts of users, you know, what's going to really resonate with the 32-year-old male versus what's going to really resonate with a 25-year-old female. We know that it's not the exact same thing. So there's all kinds of little customizations that we can also go and do, and some of those are possible with some of the clients we work with, and some of them unfortunately are not. But you know, I think that you know, we probably need like a beacon of like, hey, what is a great survey experience, and you know, and who's going to build it. And I think we've got there's so many great examples of incredible products and in the digital space today to work off of that. You know, I think it's going to be really exciting to see, you know, this industry sort of, you know, continue to grow and innovate, and how we meet that challenge.
Definitely, yeah. And I want to talk a little bit about demographics, right? It'd be great to not have to ask all of the profiling questions, but the reality is, past couple of years, and really past 5 years, I feel like clients have been asking for more and more representation in terms of, you know, having a representative sample. How are each of your companies kind of tackling those new demands? All right.
I'll take this one.
Yeah.
So when I think about inclusion and accessibility, I think about the ADA guidelines. I recently did an audit of the ADA's website and found 164 accessibility errors for the rules that they make themselves. So if they can't do it, how are we supposed to do it? So be easy on yourself. Think about the people that you're trying to get representation from and think about their limitations. How can you do that? By involving them from the start. I wholeheartedly believe that each person who's putting a survey together should have the input of someone who has a disability, someone who has low vision, no vision, might be deaf, might have upper limb mobility issues, because they experience the world a whole lot differently than you or I do. That goes with mental disorders as well. Thinking about how easy it is to swipe on all the apps, think about the people who can't swipe on apps. And because it's so common, they're commonly left out.
Right.
So that is a great solution for, they've already got it fixed, with different devices, so don't worry. But the accessibility portion is absolutely necessary and vital to survive in this industry, as 1 in 4 people identify as having a disability. And I think about, I'm partially losing my vision, and I think about, as people get older, they tend to lose different faculties of themselves. So most people will lose some hearing, most people will lose some sight, some earlier than others. And some of the innovations that have come out to solve those problems have been widely adopted, like text messaging for deaf people. So it's really important to understand that you don't know what you don't know, and then once you know better, to do better.
I think that's such an important point, because I was one of those people not too long ago where I learned a lot about reaching people who are not just like me in terms of accessibility. And we were doing work around visually impaired individuals, and you never really have to think about, well, how are we going to get the reactions on something they are going to visually interact with, right? Until you have to cross that bridge. And we were there, and I said, wow, this has reshaped everything, every way I think about reaching people where they are. And I think it's an interesting perspective, and even if you don't have the opportunity to get the input from someone who might have the disability that you're trying to reach, or someone that looks like the audience exactly, having someone who has that experience is huge. And we leaned on all of our resources, and some were existing and some were brand new, but it's connected us with a lot of different companies and individuals and organizations that focus in the areas that we needed to reach in that moment. But it's also expanded our thinking about, okay, well, who else do we need to include in the conversation, and what else do we need to be doing better? Because there's a lot of opportunity. So I love that your work is taking it beyond just our standard demos, but thinking about it even beyond that. And I think that it applies across the board. So it's a critical point.
I don't have too much to add, really. I think it's really interesting, some of your insights on like reaching and trying to engage with the folks with more disabilities, and we don't really think about it that much, and it's something to think about. And I think from our perspective, the challenge is always how do you support a client project, and being a little bit newer to market research, we've seen some, we get bids and projects, and we're like, wow, they just really called out exactly who they need to talk to here. It's very, very clear. And I think there's sometimes where we just, I don't know, from our standpoint, we just say no if we can't, if we don't feel like we have the confidence to reach that. But then on the flip side, I wonder, do the clients really believe that, there's this like, one unicorn person out there who's going to be able to, that's going to, engage in this project? And, our perspective is we reach people who are, willing to trade some time for value, who are willing to share their opinion, who want to engage on these topics. And where we engage with them in just a myriad of different channels and platforms, whether it's social or micro communities or mobile. And to Timothy's point, you have to have a really strong media mix to be able to represent the population. So you've got to be in different types of apps. You've got to be on different types of Instagram pages and Facebook groups and email newsletters and platforms and big websites. And that helps you bring in this whole mix, because if you get the message out to a large enough audience, inevitably you end up getting that fallout. And so it's pretty neat to see the aftermath of a recruitment project, and just being able to see how we were able to sort of match and hit some of those targets. I think there's going to be somebody's going to get it really well, because there's definitely a lot of sensitivity in going in and, hey, we need to find this type of person, and how do we go and find them, without having bias, without being unfriendly or whatever it might be, or having something out there. And so I think that there's some really interesting things and really tough questions and tough projects, tough items that have to get that will get solved, because there are really smart people in this room that work on these problems, myself not included. And for us, it's a challenge and an opportunity to how do you cast this really wide net. And I think it's experimentation is the real driving energy for us, because we have to constantly experiment. We have to constantly innovate. And you don't know, if you go to a website, it's I don't know, call it a blog for people who cook. Well, you'd think oh, this is just that segment. Well, it turns out there's a lot of different types of people from all different walks of life and all kinds of different ages, that fit all kinds of different pre-qualifiers that want to cook or who love to cook. So I think it's sort of you never know what you don't know, and you have to test things. And then I think there's some really good points on how do you start to make these more inclusive, so more people can join and more people can participate and have their voices heard.
Yeah, and I think just the fact that we're having more and more of these conversations, right? Because at the end of the day, we want to provide sample to our clients so they can have actionable insights for their products and services. And I feel like the more inclusive we can be from a respondent perspective, ability perspective, race and ethnicity, it's just going to be better value. I want to do kind of a one last piece of advice before we open it up for questions, because I feel like you're really good at answering some questions, some specific issues that people are having here. But what's one word of advice that you would have for engaging next generation of respondents?
I think it starts with, it's so tough because, our clients know that they're some of their websites suck. I don't think it's not like you guys don't know. So I think it's about having that forward thinking and thinking, hey, what is it that I can change today that's going to make this a better experience? To our point, one of our clients have just broke up their surveys from 25 minutes into five minute pieces. That I feel like this is something a lot of people can do. That and you need that champion. So I think that it's, hey, what can I change today that's going to make this better? And maybe it's going to be a tough change, but it's so worth it, because if you convert better, then you spend less. You don't need as many users because you're converting more of them. It's a no-brainer. And then I think it's really just about, if I go back to my experience of being at a big organization, having that internal champion who's saying, hey guys, look at YouTube versus look at our site, and can we not identify some areas, or maybe we should put some money into improving this experience. So I think that's probably the piece of advice. I think that there are things that can be changed. We can all do better in our day-to-day lives. So I don't think it's that different in that regard.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm going to use two phrases that might be kind of cliche, because as I listen to what you're saying, I totally agree. And I think the two things that come to mind are lead with empathy and get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think those are two things that from a cultural perspective, we've had to get really real about. And that's what we need from partners, as well as when I come knocking down the door. I promise I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I'm sitting here thinking, what are we doing to change the dynamic? What are we doing to change the diversity of the samples that we're using? I ask those questions a lot, and we're challenging a lot of our partners with those questions, and we totally get that there's not a single simple answer, but just being willing to evolve and admit that we don't know it all and we don't have all of the answers, but we're trying to be better. So those are, thinking about leading with empathy for the respondent, for our clients, for our partners, from other researchers, and then just being comfortable saying, I don't know yet, but we're working on it and we're gonna figure it out together. And I think there's a lot of opportunity to collaborate across the board, partners, clients, go-betweens alike. It's just one of those things that we're all gonna have to work really hard together and realize that we're just not there yet.
You just said a great job doing that. What I would say is definitely, if feel free, as you said, to tell the client, I deal with, what is it, 300 different customers, whatever it is, 30 million different customers, and the best practices that I've seen are this: would you like to do this, or would you like to do what you're currently doing? If they still want to do what they're currently doing, still be that resource that you can help them maybe with questionnaire design, because it's a two-way street. Questionnaire design, customization of, you want to keep people in the environment that they're comfortable with when they're in the survey. So branding is very key there. But being untraditional and being able to say, I don't have that answer, but who does? These guys. So we're gonna tap on them and work together.
Awesome. Kelsey, Timothy, Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your insights. So we have a couple minutes for questions. I'd love to hear some questions.
Hi. Hi, everyone. This is my first SampleCon. Hi, everyone. So this might be the format or not be the format. I'm not exactly sure. Okay.
You're good.
So thank you for your conversation. I really loved what everyone had to say here. I'm just trying to make sure I gather my thoughts. I think what I heard yesterday was that the goal for panel is to treat people more human-like and to make sure that the interactions are more than just about the data so that we can have better panel sample overall, right? And I just kind of connecting that conversation with this one, I think it's really important, as we kind of already heard, to make sure that the identity questions and making sure people are heard from the beginning are gonna facilitate that process, right? And I say that because I'm pretty sure for some of you who have maybe engaged in this with your clients and your brands and your agencies, there's a bit of an ebb and flow in that thought process of, we need to be more inclusive, and then it gets too hard. So let's go back to what's easy and simple, right? And I think as an industry, we owe it to ourselves to do the hard thing, to do the costly thing, so that we can set the record and make it better, going forward. And I think if you ever had to question if it's important, it's because you've never felt partially seen or unseen in a research study, right? So I guess my question, and this could be rhetorical, and I don't know that we have the answer to this, is can we just go ahead and nip this in the bud and figure out a way to just measure the effectiveness of making sure that we're inclusive from the start and how that impacts the progress of our panel samples? Because at the end of the day, I think we can gamify this as many times as we want to, and we can create this kind of fun question community. But if I'm not seen as a respondent, then I'm just gonna, not necessarily give you the best answers. So is there a way that an agency or kind of company can just go ahead and track this and push these results out to the masses so it can stop being a hypothesis?
That's a really interesting question. I think the easy answer is no. It's not going to be a kind of switch that we can flip that it happens and we have all of the KPIs behind this is the effective way of doing this, right? And I think that's what we've learned is that we can't say this is the right way of asking a question to make sure everyone is seen or everyone is included. And I think it goes back to the conversation around inclusion versus representation. And what are we really going for? And how do we really see people? And a lot of the people in this room, us included, are really responsible for this. When I think about going to a partner and saying, okay, I need a representative population based on gender, let's say, and the only targeting capability is male-female, like, well, I'm missing a whole bunch of people in that, right? So I wish it were as simple as saying we've tested it, we've proven it, and being inclusive and being and hearing the people who are participating from the front end is the difference maker. I think in our guts we all believe it. We live it and know that we're not there yet. But I don't know that there's a simple. Maybe there's an academic in the room who can figure it out. But I don't think there's a simple way to do it, but I think we all feel it, that it's the right thing to do, whether it's simple or not.
And
Thank you. Go ahead, Mario.
I was going to answer your question a little bit differently. I mean, I don't think there's any studies necessarily that we can point to, but I think we see the implications of not being inclusive in research through some marketing faux pas that we've seen throughout the past 20, 30 years, and even more recently, right, when we're more aware of the business need to be more inclusive, we still see companies stumbling and putting out things that, from a marketing perspective, they shouldn't. So I think that's not a study, but definitely a consequence of not being inclusive in research.
Point. Thank you.
I have one more thought for that. I think we can change, and I think that there should be, an opt-in sort of process that you say, hey, we are inclusive because of this designation that we have. If you look at the governing bodies that have been the question makers, the census, it's really embarrassing to look at the 1920s, 1930s, 1950s. Questions about race and gender and things like that. And so it's okay to be wrong. It's okay. Economic impact-wise, I can tell you that I think Uber wishes they would have done a few more studies on accessibility before they ended up in the Supreme Court. But I think the cautionary tales are the ones that we can be telling until this gets solved.
If I may, I'd like to push on that topic a little bit more. I'm delighted to hear that there is a growing recognition for representation, and it's no longer being considered as kryptonite, because not only that helps providing quality, actionable data to your existing clients, but it also begins to open the door for the other side of the fence, the survey researchers, which is where I come from. So what I'd like to ask is, what are some of the immediate thoughts, hypotheses, in terms of improving the representation of the sample that you deliver to your clients? I appreciate the concern and empathy for that, but what is the panel industry as a whole doing to improve representation?
That's a good question. So I can, from the recruitment side, I think the reality is that we can make things could be even more inclusive than they are today. The people that want to participate in market research want to participate, and some people don't want to participate. So that's a really important thing to remember, is that you're asking somebody to trade 10 minutes for $1. You going to trade 10 minutes for $1? No. So we all have to come back to, well, like, who's actually going to feel inclined, and so we want to, our job is to engage and excite a consumer, get them over that hoop where they might say, I'm not trading 10 minutes for $1, but today I am, because I care about this topic, or this is something fun for me to do, or I feel like this is a community that I want to be a part of online. There's all these different, there's lots of different variables, but I think at the end of the day, it's like, not everybody, most people don't want to take surveys. That's why this industry exists, right? If everybody wants to take surveys. So how do we make them more representative? How do you get better representation? I think some of the points that I made earlier, were people don't want to go and, people won't use a website from 20 years ago, and so they leave. Right? So you never get that representation because they don't want to stick around there. It's sort of, I think we had like a conference call last week. We were talking about this panel, and the experience in the digital world today is like, you see this, you're in an Instagram group, you're watching a funny story, you're feeling very entertained, again, beautiful, slick experience. that influencer is like, hey, you know, sports lover, why don't you join this community for sports fans? It's really awesome. You can make a couple bucks a month, and you will get to influence the game. Okay, cool, sold. Get to a website. That website looks great. It's got 2 questions, like, you know, I don't know, gender and age, let's just say. You hit start. And then all of a sudden, you're in the 1920s, right? So, you know, I think, you know, you probably look at data like a really objective way, and I think probably the takeaway, at least from where I stand, is like, you know, the software that, you know, usually collects that data just isn't reflecting where consumers want to be at and where they want to spend their time, and so they're now less likely to want to want to join in there, and so that's one thing. And then I think just trying to, instead of having so many different criteria and so many like pre-qualifiers for everything, just trying to break some of those away so that more people can get in. You know, and it's really hard to spell out sometimes on, you know, these different demographic markers to say, you know, hey, person of this thing, or hey, you know, person of that thing, you know. So there's lots of challenges, and they're abound, and I think we all just need to continue doing a better, you know, just trying to improve on the areas where we can. I hope that's a good answer. Or, who's got the next zinger for us?
I think we have time for one more question.
Sure.
Hi, my name is Naeem, and I'm founder and CEO of Neston Services from Dubai, UAE. My question is, what's the best way to recruit B2B panelists, especially C-level? The recruitment process.
I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat the question, sir?
What's the best way to recruit B2B panelists for a panel, especially C-level?
Okay, so you know, I think you know, we see a lot of projects for like IT-DMs. Like, hey, I want to talk to a CTO of a Fortune 1000 company and give him $32, or give them $32, I should say, for a 100-minute survey. Okay, so we're talking about a person who makes $1 million a year, and you want them to take away an hour to go through a crappy website and then give responses. So I think you've got a level set. Hey, if you want IT decision makers, and we're really talking about people that are VPs and above, let's be real about who those people really are. You know, and maybe that goes back to that lady's question of inclusion. Like, let's actually really have a real conversation about what and who an IT decision maker is, right? And what's going to really help them pull their strings so that they want to engage. Because, you know, we're all experts in our own right. I'm in an expert network, like one of the big expert networks, because I'm an expert in in-store background music, believe it or not. And, you know, those people harass me to get on calls, and they pay a lot of money, and I still don't want to take the calls because it's not worth the time. So I think it's about probably level setting expectations on who's an IT decision maker, who do we really need answers from, you know, and right sizing those rewards, or the value that person gets. You know, it might be that if one of us could influence, you know, if you love AirPods and you could influence the next generation of AirPods, you might be willing to take a little bit less dough because you really want to see a change in AirPods. But you know, I think that on the B2B side, you know, I think there's just generally a disconnect between what's being offered to the respondent and the respondent that you're looking for. So inevitably what you get is people lying because they want to make the $20, and they'll say that they're a VP of IT at a Fortune 1000 company, but there's probably some IT people here, and they've never taken a survey before for anything less than $100 because it wouldn't make sense for them economically to do so. So I think that's probably like get real. Why don't you get real with a project first, and then I think, you know, I think that's a major thing for B2B.
Two quick things. What I would say here is test their knowledge of said subject matter, make sure they are experts to get them in there. And then once they're in there, give them an opportunity up front to say, you know, there's no amount of money that's gonna make you take this survey, straight up. You're not gonna take this survey for money, but we will donate to this cause that you have, that someone you love cares about. We will improve this product, and you will be able to see the change that you made by giving your voice and your time. So I think that's where you would stray away from a financial incentive and talk about charitable access to premium content that only the people in their network would see, as well as giving them the results of that project and say, we heard you, come back.
Just a consideration for everyone in the room. From what I heard yesterday, people are looking for viable candidates. Maybe we should start incentivizing with that for our IT decision makers and B2B samples. We'll get you 2 viable candidates.
I like the I think the charitable
Yeah, the charitable.
angle makes a lot of
Thank
sense.
you so much, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Mario.
Thank you.